Welcome to today's webinar, From Concept to Cultivation, Startup Strategies for New Cannabis Operations. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Noelle Skadinsky, Editorial Director at Cannabis Business Times, and this webinar I think is really important and is really resonating with a lot of people because the startup phase of your cultivation operation is really what lays the foundation for your success, or hopefully not failure, in the future. Mistakes are extremely common, and as some of you may unfortunately know, often very costly. So we're thrilled to present today's webinar to help you navigate this very critical phase of your operation. So whether you're in the early stages of planning, ready to flip the switch on a new facility, this webinar is designed to equip you with insights to transition smoothly from design to full-scale cultivation, avoid those common pitfalls, and establish a foundation for long-term success. Joining us today are experts from Pipp Horticulture, the sponsor of today's webinar. And if you're not familiar with Pipp, they are an industry-leading provider of mobile vertical growing solutions with installations in over 3,000 grow rooms worldwide. So first, I'm going to welcome our speakers and then do some housekeeping notes. I'm very pleased to welcome Michael Williamson. As the Director of Cultivation, Michael fuses 15 years of licensed commercial cannabis ownership and operational excellence to provide support and strategy to Pipp's engineering and sales teams. He co-founded Greenhouse Industries in 2013, which is now a division of Pipp Horticulture. And it was one of the first vertical farming companies to provide products and solutions tailored to the cannabis industry. He's operated and consulted on over 7 million square feet of indoor greenhouse and outdoor cultivation facilities worldwide. And he has more than 40,000 hours, it's a lot of hours, working in cultivation and dispensary operations, including over 3,500 compliant cannabis harvests. Michael is also GAP certified and an advocate for lean farming and manufacturing practices. I'm also pleased to welcome Anders Peterson. Anders is the Director of Horticulture at Pipp and helps integrate mobile vertical racks and vertical air solutions, airflow systems into facility designs. He's a leader in indoor controlled environment agriculture, facility design and operation, with an academic background in cell and molecular biology and over 10 years of cannabis industry experience. I want to thank Michael and Anders for leading this very important conversation, and obviously Pipp Horticulture for making this webinar possible. But I wanted to just give a special shout out and thank you to Michael and Anders. We had a prep call for this webinar early last week, and Michael was and his community were in the midst of recovering from the hurricane. When we spoke with Michael, he had no power, was working on getting some Tesla generators up and running, helping the community get put back together, and still made time to join the webinar. So I just feel like if that's not dedication to your work and to the industry, I'm really not sure what is. Anders was also neck deep in a major facility build out at the time and still took the time out to do the prep call for this webinar. So greatly appreciate both of you and everything that you're currently working on and making the time for this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
So before we dive in, I just want to mention a few housekeeping notes. If you've been on webinars with us before, you know the drill. Everyone on the call has been muted and the video has been turned off except for our presenters. There will be time at the end of the webinar to answer your questions, and you can submit those at any time during the webinar using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You'll also see a chat box, but we ask that you try to use the Q&A button so that we can be sure to see your questions all in one place. And again, we'll get to as many as we can, but Michael and Anders have graciously offered to try to answer any questions that we are unable to get to in a blog post. And we are recording today's webinar, and we'll be emailing a copy of the recording to all registrants in the coming days. And we will include a link to the blog post if it's available at that time, which I'm thinking it probably will be. And with that, I am pleased to turn it over to Michael Williamson. Welcome.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Before I get started, at some point during this slide, you're going to have a poll that gets initiated. And essentially, we just kind of want to know where you're at in your process. And, if you can take a moment to do that, we'll look at that data and make it public. And then Anders and I will tailor our conversation kind of based on our audience a little bit there. So thank you for participating in the poll. On behalf of our innovative and market-leading team at Pipp Horticulture, I want to extend a heartfelt thanks to Cannabis Business Times for hosting and promoting this webinar as well. At Pipp, our focus is entirely on our customers, which is typically growers. We develop products and solutions grounded in feedback from growers and operational excellence in the field that is then validated by both internal and third-party scientific research and data. Most importantly, I want to thank all the attendees for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. I always review the attendee list after the webinars, and it's really incredible to see just where everyone is tuning in from around the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you may be. Thank you for joining us today. Our goal with these webinars is always the same. It's to share the knowledge and the lessons that we've accumulated over the past decade plus. Our goal is to empower growers, executives, and entrepreneurs to manage risk and to get the most out of their cultivation facilities. While today's discussion is slightly tailored to cannabis operations, I want you to know that the insights that we're going to be sharing today are also very applicable for non-cannabis CEA or controlled environment agriculture crops. All right, so I'm going to go to the next slide. So why is the commissioning process so critical prior to startup? Commissioning also sometimes is referred to as CX. So you might hear us say CX, and we're just referring to commissioning. Also, one of my other questions that I'm going to be posing for us today is, why is it so commonly overlooked, and why is it not performed for many cannabis cultivation facilities? So while there's several reasons that we're going to discuss today, the two main reasons on why commissioning is so critical are optimal performance and risk mitigation. Commissioning ensures that all systems, such as HVAC, lighting, fertigation, irrigation. You're going to hear us talk a lot about systems today. So if we say systems, that's generally that kind of basket that we're referring to. These are all functional. It makes sure that everything is functional and and operating as intended before plants are introduced. This process helps you identify and resolve issues that could compromise plant health, yield, and ultimately maximize production efficiency and improve quality. By validating that all the equipment and the systems are properly installed and calibrated, commissioning reduces the risk of operational failures and setbacks that could lead to crop loss and/or poor quality. This proactive approach can save cultivators significant costs associated with downtime, rework, or losses due to suboptimal growing conditions. So despite its benefits, the commissioning process is often overlooked in cannabis for several reasons. Cost and time constraints are a big one. So cost and time constraints often pressure cultivators to move plants into a facility before it's truly ready for operational success. This urgency can be driven by a lot of different factors, but typically it's driven by owners, C-suites and executives, and investors who are eager to see a return on their investment. In the cannabis industry, this is particularly common among new market entrants who may lack the expertise to fully understand the consequences of rushing the process. Instead of prioritizing commissioning, many cultivators focus on getting their operation up and running as quickly as possible. They often believe that an operational issue can be addressed as it arises. However, this approach can lead to costly inefficiencies, operational disruptions, low yields, and even crop loss, all of which are avoidable with proper commissioning. So it's important to note as well, a certificate of occupancy or a CO, while necessary for legal compliance, does not guarantee that the facility is fully ready for cannabis cultivation. A CO only confirms the facility is safe for occupancy according to the building codes. It does not verify that critical systems like HVAC and fertigation and lighting and environmental controls are functioning and at optimal levels for plant health and yield. One of the other common reasons that we see is just a simple lack of awareness. You have a lot of operators out there that are doing this for the first time, and they don't come from commercial production or commercial construction. And so the general concept of commissioning it never passes their mind. So we strategically selected this topic for this webinar really to raise awareness about this critical and often overlooked step in the process of setting up a cultivation facility. Many cultivators, especially those entering the market for the first time, have had to deal with avoidable setbacks because their facilities weren't properly commissioned before bringing plants in. We hope to help growers avoid these unnecessary costs and downtime by stressing the importance of proper planning and commissioning as part of the startup process. We'll go to the next slide.
All right.
Michael,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we need to close the poll and share the results before we can move to your next slides. I think we
Okay.
missed. Sorry about that.
No problem. Is that something I need to do on my end? Oh, yeah.
Just let Liz know that we're ready to
Okay.
close
See,
it and
looks like-
share the
looks like
results.
43% of you guys are in the pre-operational design phase, which is great because it means you haven't had to commission your facility yet, and there's still time to plan for this. We've got 15% of you in the operational phase. We'll be talking about retro commissioning or RCX as well. So don't fret. There's opportunities for you as well to fix some things that you probably have been beating your head against the wall for a while. 14% consultants. We're always trying to make sure that people that are doing advising out there in the world are giving the best advisements possible. And we got 9% research and 2% equipment manufacturers. So we got a nice, well-rounded group here, and we look forward to tailoring this discussion so that it's easily palatable and can hopefully be applicable to you today.
Yeah, that's a good mix there in the audience. And thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your time here and your attention. And to kind of jump right into it, the first slide here, commissioning versus startup. We want to go through a few distinctions. In the context of a commercial cannabis facility, commissioning and startup refer to two distinct phases that are often confused but serve different purposes. Commissioning is a thorough, structured process aimed at ensuring that all systems in lighting, fertigation, and environmental controls are designed, installed, and functioning as intended before operations begin. Essentially, did you get what you purchased, and does it work? It involves testing and validating the performance of these systems to optimize conditions for plant growth. Commissioning ensures the facility's equipment and systems are fully functional, before cultivation starts. Reduces the chance of major operational issues. And kind of a fun fact, but the term commissioning is actually a concept from the shipbuilding industry and has been around for over 100 years. A commissioned ship that has passed all the necessary tests is ready to sail, as they say. In the commissioning process of a cannabis cultivation facility, equipment and systems are tested to verify that they meet design specifications. Issues are identified and resolved well before live plants ever enter the facility. It ensures that the facility is operating efficiently, compliant with regulations, and capable of producing consistent yields. Commissioning typically takes 1 to 2 weeks after construction and install are completed and is done by specialized engineers and technicians. This reduces risks related to poor environmental control, contamination, or equipment malfunction. Now that's more of the traditional definition or sense of commissioning. And Michael, can you explain what the startup process entails and how it kind of differs from commissioning?
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of the world that I live in. I'm a bit of a startup junkie if you've not heard one of my webinars before or a podcast, but startup refers to the first operational phase of the facility once plants are brought in and cultivation begins. This is when cultivation teams work to adjust to real life conditions, monitor crop health, and fine-tune process for actual production. So during the startup process, plants are typically moved into a facility, usually once all the systems that we've been talking about, HVAC, lighting, fertigation, are believed to be ready. The focus shifts to managing plant health, running initial cultivation cycles, training staff, and making adjustments based on real-time data. Often cultivators encounter unforeseen issues such as environmental fluctuations, equipment failures, and unfortunately, things like pest and disease. The startup phase often results in a learning curve where yields and/or quality may not meet expectations during the first few harvests due to system and process inefficiencies. What are some of the key differences here between the two? Well, it's much easier to commission a facility with no plants in. Once the plants are in, the rooms are relying on those systems to grow and live. It's a living, breathing organism just like us. And so during the commissioning, you're often bringing the whole system down to fix an issue. So the idea with commissioning is we're going to do all this, make sure that we pressure test everything and make sure that everything's functioning so that when we do bring in plants, we don't have to worry about having something fail on us and having to bring a whole system down. If you have to bring a whole system down with live plants, there is a risk and reward factor, and there's consequences to that. So these are life supporting systems again in a controlled environment. So once the plants are moved in, it becomes very difficult and hard to shut off a critical system to repair or fix it versus something when there's no plants in the room. It's important to note that most cannabis projects do not follow the traditional commissioning and startup process, but everyone does startup, but not everyone does commissioning. We're hoping today with this webinar that some of you will start doing commissioning and startup.
And
Go ahead.
And not to forget too, but every time you have to bring these systems down and bring them back online and make repairs while you're growing plants, that also means more and more technicians and contractors coming in and out of your facility presenting an IPM risk. It's a lot easier to do it all up front when the plants aren't in there, and then you can deep clean the facility and have a fresh start.
Couldn't agree
Okay.
more.
Okay. So in a commercial cannabis cultivation, third-party commissioning and owner commissioning are two approaches to commissioning a facility, each with its own set of advantages and considerations. So third-party commissioning involves hiring an independent external firm or consultant to perform the commissioning process. This is a more traditional commissioning process, having an agent or a firm come in. These third-party specialists typically have deep expertise in various systems such as HVAC, fertigation, and environmental controls, and they focus solely on ensuring that all the equipment is operating according to how it was designed and the manufacturer's specifications. Some advantages of third-party commissioning over owner-performed commissioning are objectivity, like right away. A third-party firm provides an unbiased assessment with no vested interest in the project's design, installation, or ongoing operations. Their primary goal is to ensure systems work optimally. And it's also important to note that a third-party commissioning agent or firm, works for the owner of the project, not the GC or an equipment vendor. So they're not constrained by the construction hierarchy or reporting to someone like a GC. These firms also have expertise. They're often very highly specialized with experience across many different types of facilities, including CEA and cannabis operations. They're also highly accountable. Third-party commissioning firms provide detailed reports. They perform diagnostics and certifications, and they hold equipment manufacturers and installation teams accountable for any deficiencies. These design review and final commissioning reports can be extremely useful to set a baseline for how your systems are functioning at the beginning of your facility. So that gives you a baseline so that over the life of your facility, you can determine if your equipment is losing performance or starting to malfunction. And then finally, risk mitigation. Since third-party firms have no direct ties to the facility, they are more likely to identify and address any potential issues, reducing the risk of failure during the startup phase. Some other considerations for third-party commissioning compared to owner-performed commissioning are cost, right? The service is not free. This approach can be more expensive since you are paying for an outside service. However, the savings from catching issues early on often outweigh the initial cost of the service. We have seen businesses lose millions of dollars in the first years of operations due to underperforming or malfunctioning equipment, when all of that could have been avoided if they just properly commissioned the facility. And I guess one of the other comparisons is coordination. It just requires more coordination and collaboration between the commissioning team, the owner, and the contractors to ensure seamless communication and execution. Just because you hire a third party to commission your facility does not mean you shouldn't be involved in the process. We highly recommend growers to be involved because it can help you learn the ins and outs of your systems and be more prepared to troubleshoot when things go wrong. Michael, can you go over a little bit of what owner commissioning is and how it compares to third-party commissioning?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it depends on your scale and your size. Some of these third party or owner commission stuff, it can make sense based off of someone's background. I'll give a shout out to my team at Bostica in Lynn, Massachusetts. Our leadership team has 40 years in HVAC, so we did a lot of our own commissioning, internally. But not everybody has that skill set. So there's going to be these outlying cases. But typically when we talk about owner commissioning, the facility owner and their internal team handles the commissioning process. Pretty straightforward. Sometimes this is performed by in-house engineers, facilities, maintenance, or cultivation staff that's already on your team. And they oversee and verify the installation and performance of the systems. Like anything that you do, there's always advantages and disadvantages. So some of the advantages of owner commissioning is it's cost effective. Like I said, you typically already have these people on payroll, so you're not really coming out of pocket too much more than you normally would. So it can be a lot less expensive since you're not paying for external service. This is especially attractive for smaller scale facilities with tighter budgets. The other thing is you most likely, if you're doing it internally, instead of bringing an outside source, you already have familiarity with the facility. The owner's team has intimate knowledge of the facility if they were involved throughout the design and engineering process and the construction process, which makes them more effective at identifying practical and real-time adjustments during commissioning. Like most people who love this factor in the cannabis space, control. The owner maintains complete control over the timeline, process, and decisions, which can streamline communication and execution. You don't have to rely on someone else to deliver. And if you don't deliver, you can kind of point your finger at yourself to some degree. Like I said, everything has advantages and disadvantages. So what are some of the disadvantages? Well, there's a potential for bias. Internal teams may not be as objective. They might overlook certain issues due to familiarity or a desire to expedite the process. They also might have a limited expertise. So while the owner's team may be familiar with cultivation, they may not have the same specialized commissioning expertise as a third-party firm, potentially leading to operational efficiencies or missed opportunities for optimization. One of the things that Anders and I preach about, and Anders is living proof of this as a grower turned, I always say you got to be more than just a grower. And so the best in class and more successful cultivators that we've met from around the world, they're a lot more than growers. These are cultivators who operate at the highest levels of performance and efficiency and often take time to become familiar with key mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and engineering, along with data and control systems within their facilities. This broad but holistic knowledge allows them to better manage critical systems and ensure that they are running efficiently. This technical mastery enables cultivators to enhance communication with facility technicians, engineers, third-party contractors, by having a shared understanding of the systems. Third-party commissioning provides an objective, expert-led process to ensure the facility's system functions optimally and is as designed. It's particularly useful in larger and more complex projects where independent verification is essential. Owner commissioning gives the owner more direct control, like we talked about, over the process and can be more cost effective, but may come with limitations in objectivity and specialized knowledge. So, in commercial cannabis cultivation, choosing between these options often depends on the scale of the facility, the budget, and the owner's level of comfort and expertise with handling technical aspects of commissioning. Many larger, sophisticated operations opt for third-party commissioning to ensure higher levels of risk mitigation and long-term success. So
for some context too, like Michael and I have been to hundreds of indoor cultivation facilities worldwide, and I would say only a handful have ever truly gone through a true third-party commissioning process. I mean, yeah, very few that we've seen. And then even a more formal owner performed commissioning, again, not all of them have done this. And I think that's the purpose of having this webinar today, is to kind of make awareness. Because on the backside, we see all the struggles and issues these facilities face because they didn't go through this process. So it's not like every facility out there has done this, but it's quite important.
Anders, can you highlight, I guess, what happens when the CX or commissioning process is not performed, which would be probably the majority of operators out there today?
Yeah. And so when commissioning is not properly confirmed or completed in a a cannabis facility, several bad things can occur that directly impact both short-term and long-term profitability. One of the first key risks would be system failures and inefficiencies. Without commissioning, critical systems like HVAC, airflow, lighting, and fertigation may not be calibrated correctly, and this can result in inconsistent climate control, causing huge fluctuations in temperature and humidity that will ultimately impact your plant health. Things like uneven irrigation or nutrient distribution, leading to nutrient deficiencies or overfeeding. Equipment malfunctions that could lead to more downtime, requiring expensive repairs or replacements. In fact, we see systems fail in the field all the time due to lack of commissioning. A good example of this is we were at a facility in California that didn't commission their HVAC system and had no idea that the outdoor air hood was wide open on this packaged unit and was bringing in outdoor air when they thought it was fully recirculating and closed loop. It just so happens that their neighbor was a composting facility, and this outdoor air hood being open brought in tons of microbes into the facility, causing them to fail lab tests for years, and it resulted in millions in losses. So that's just, if they had just gone through the commissioning process and made sure the systems were set up and functioning as they had designed, that could have all been avoided. We also see things like for chilled water, hot water systems, people not properly flushing their lines after install. So there's all kinds of stuff in the lines that will clog filters, lines, and valves, leading to serious issues and costly failure scenarios. Another key risk of not commissioning is reduced yield and quality. Cannabis plants are highly sensitive, and poorly calibrated systems can create suboptimal growing conditions, leading to stunted growth, increased pest and pathogen pressure, and reduced potency and quality. Increased operating costs is another key risk of not commissioning a facility. Without commissioning, energy use, water consumption, labor costs may rise. If systems aren't optimized, energy costs can spike, particularly for lighting and HVAC. Water and nutrient waste can be increased, affecting the operational budget, and particularly labor inefficiencies, for manual adjustments and troubleshooting equipment failures can lead to higher overhead. If you constantly have stuff breaking down or needing fixes, more of your staff needs to be dedicated to addressing those issues. Regulatory noncompliance is also another serious key risk. These facilities must adhere to strict regulatory standards for environmental control, product quality, and safety. If systems aren't properly commissioned, the facility risks failing inspections, leading to fines or penalties. Delays in licensing approval can also occur if a facility fails to meet these standards. And in a worst case, you ultimately have something like a product recall if these quality standards aren't met, which can ultimately harm your brand's reputation. What are some other risks, Michael, if we didn't properly commission a facility?
And it's a long list, but
It really is.
Yeah, delays is a good one. And there's a lot of different things that can get delayed, but delays in production and launch. A poorly commissioned facility may face significant delays in the starting of production. When harvest timelines are delayed, it has this almost domino effect on everything else too. So it can have a ripple effect on cannabis cultivation operations, particularly in terms of revenue generation. These delays in production often lead to financial pain points because many businesses allocate limited working capital based on an optimistic and often unrealistic timeline. Without padding the budget or building in a buffer for unforeseen circumstances, delays in system commissioning, unexpected equipment issues, cultivation setbacks can create cash flow challenges, which become a real and very painful problem for people who haven't even put out their first crop yet. Without the planned influx of revenue for harvest sales, businesses may struggle to cover ongoing operational expenses like employee wages, utilities, loan repayments. So delays in production also increase the costs associated with maintaining the facility while no revenue is being generated. A lot of people think they've got a brand new facility, but brand new facilities need regular scheduled maintenance. So if you can't afford to do that, now you're creating greater problems downstream. So this situation can really it really can snowball. and make it difficult to stay afloat, especially for newer companies that may not have the contingency funds in place. The key to mitigating these issues is realistic planning, where buffers for both time and working capital are built into the initial financial model. This approach allows operators to weather delays without jeopardizing the financial health of the operation. Another one is like you're always tweaking or always changing, you're always band-aid solution, you're always kind of like, this is off, this is wrong. And so you're in this constant almost flux of like personal stress. Without a formal commissioning process, cannabis cultivation facilities often require multiple retrofits or system adjustments after being operational. This is a situation I like to describe as like repairing the airplane mid-flight. Like nobody wants to do that. It's kind of terrifying too, but it's extremely common. And I'm sure the growers on this that are attending this webinar are probably nodding their head yes. But this can lead to several challenges such as unplanned costs, unexpected expenses arise as facilities are forced to upgrade, modify equipment to meet performance needs that weren't addressed during the initial setup. Delays, extended downtime, delays while waiting for new parts, especially if they have a long lead time. That can totally halt and extend operation downtime for a dangerous amount of time in some cases. We always recommend that you have a spare parts list or a T-lot where you have a time life of parts list of all the critical items and you keep those on your shelf. And it's good ahead of time to identify which of these parts commonly break and which of them have the longest lead time. And you can kind of assess based on your budget and the lead times. All right, if that's an 8-week lead time, I need to have that on my shelf. If that's a part that I can go get down at any plumbing supply place or HVAC supply place, then maybe you don't need one on the shelf. But these are all things to plan for. Disruption to cultivation schedules. That's you go in there with this plan, and it almost never goes according to plan. And if you're not going to commission your facility, I can almost guarantee that your production schedules are going to be all over the place. So while you're integrating or repairing a new system, it can throw off all your timelines, leading to delays, causing challenges for your wholesale team or your retail team when they're trying to predict how much crop is coming downstream. And then the obvious one, increased risk of crop failure or loss. A big one for me is people don't realize this, but if your systems aren't efficiently operating, it creates suboptimal workflow for your labor. So I know today we're talking a lot about commissioning systems and equipment, but it's crucial to highlight that these directly impact your team's workflow and labor efficiency. A properly commissioned facility does more than just ensure optimal equipment functionality. It sets the tone, the pace, the cadence, and the expectations for labor processes. When commissioning is overlooked, operational bottlenecks are likely to occur, leading to inefficiencies that increase the number of non-value adding touches, as I like to refer to them, and ultimately raise your cost of goods sold or your COGS. By ensuring your systems are correctly commissioned, you help streamline your labor force, reduce unnecessary manual interventions, and minimize downtime, allowing your team to operate more efficiently from day one. Like I said, I can go on forever about this, but the last one I'll say is, lack of data. You're trying to baseline when you first get started so that here's where we are today and here's where we're trying to go. But if you can't baseline your operation, that data is not collected. It makes it harder to optimize in the future. Any performance metrics established later may be skewed due to the initial inefficiencies that were never resolved. So
Yeah.
I think we could talk about this one forever, but to summarize, Anders, you want to bring this one home?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not ignoring the fact that we know these projects take a long time to design and get built, sometimes years, and it can cost a lot of money. And there's definitely a lot of pressure to move plants in very quickly and start growing right away. But when you look at the useful life of these facilities, when you're planning for them, let's say they're 20 to 25 years useful life. Is 2 weeks really going to make or break your business plan getting this set up? So doing proper commissioning and considering all of these risks that we've highlighted by not commissioning a facility. So to summarize, skipping or inadequately completing the commissioning process can lead to significant operational setbacks, increased costs, and lost revenue opportunities.
Before we go to that next slide, I want to highlight what you said I think we didn't say it enough, but or we didn't say it really at all until just now. But the typical commissioning process is 1 to 2 weeks, maybe 3.
Well, once construction starts, right? Because like a commissioning agent can be with you from the very beginning of the design process, but the true on-site commissioning, once everything's installed, yeah, maybe only a week or two. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. I just want to make sure that people know that we're not talking about this like monumentally long process. When we say to delay bringing plants in, we're not talking about delay it months. And we know what it's like to feel those pressures from investors of like, we need to get these plants in because we need our first harvest. We're talking about slowing down for a week or two in most cases.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say you're a facility that didn't do traditional startup and commissioning, and you haven't done this process. You now know the risks. What can you do? That's where a term called retro commissioning comes in. And retro commissioning is a process that seeks to improve how building equipment and systems function together. Often it can resolve issues that were either overlooked during the design or construction phase or have developed over time as a building ages. In a cannabis cultivation facility where the precision of environmental control systems is critical, retro commissioning offers an opportunity, to optimize the performance and fix problems that were not addressed during the initial startup.
I like to think of like retro commissioning. I like to think of it as like a race car. And let's just say that race car is trying to compete in a race, but it has a blown gasket. So a blown gasket can lead to a horsepower loss, often exceeding 50%, depending on the severity of the leak and the affected cylinders. Now, this compromised race car, it can make it down the track as is. It's going to limp along, but it'll never win a race. So the same is true for a compromised and not fully commissioned cultivation facility that is stuck yielding somewhere between 35 and 50 grams per square foot. And they're dealing regularly with quality issues. Meanwhile, the top growers are standing on the podium and they're exceeding 85 plus grams per square foot and they're winning cannabis cups. When retro commissioning, cultivators may have to take a creative and even an old school approach by creating temporary, low cost, and simplified workarounds. So I guess what do I mean by an old school approach? For those of you that have been doing this a long time, let's think back to how cannabis was grown 10 to 15 years ago. Very few growers had advanced control systems, integrated HVAC, fertigation systems. I mean, some of us, myself and Anders included, we didn't have irrigation. We would hand water plants every single day. Was it smart? No. But did we grow great cannabis back then still? Yes. And so what we're saying is if you're an existing operator and you know that your systems have limitations and they're not reaching their full potential, it may make sense to create some temporary systems. It could be as simple as going back to, all right, we know our fertigation, our irrigation's all messed up, but we can't really pull it out because we don't have a backup system. Well, you can create a very cheap backup system the way that you used to do it 10 or 15 years ago. You get a submersive pump, you get a big IBC tote, you cut a hole in the top, you mix your nutrients in there, and you hand water. We're not recommending this long term. We're just saying do this short term as a Band-Aid while you're commissioning and fixing your main systems. Though this process can be complex and temporary increases labor efforts, the goal is to ensure that all systems are running optimally to avoid further operational efficiencies or risk the crops. To quote Martin Luther King, sometimes to move forward, we have to go backwards. The benefit of retro commissioning includes resolving design and construction errors, improving system performances, and potentially lowering operational costs by identifying and fixing inefficiencies. You might not be stuck at 50 grams per square anymore once your systems are optimized. You might be able to get to that 85 plus grams a square foot.
Yeah. Well, and there are some minimum steps growers can take if a typical startup and commissioning process was not done. It may not be true retro commissioning in the sense and from traditional construction industry, but a lot of these steps are meant to essentially get a baseline of the main cultivation systems and quantify how well they are performing. And this quantification or baselining of your systems can then start as a starting point for improvements. For example, you can test your fertigation system's accuracy and consistency. Place your drippers in a catch cup at multiple catch cups at multiple locations throughout the room. Run the irrigation system for a set time and record the volume of water during that period. This can help make sure that every plant is getting the same amount of water during an irrigation event. If you have a 0.5 gallon per hour dripper, are you getting that amount of water you expect? And funny enough, I did this process on Friday. We've partnered with Dr. Allison Justice and the Cannabis Research Coalition, and we built out some research grow rooms there for Pipp and the CRC to conduct some research. I put drip stakes in a cup and a graduated cylinder. I think I got 80 milliliters in 60 seconds at 15 PSI, right? So that information is just a baseline for starting up that research facility so that as we operate, I know what to expect in terms of irrigation events and, to see if the systems are getting clogged later down at a later date. Some things you can also create temperature, humidity, and airflow maps of your room to better understand where microclimates or dead spots may exist in your space. This will help you identify issues with your design or install and help you better understand how to run your room or even where to place certain cultivars within that space. If you have an unavoidable hotspot in your room, do certain cultivars perform better in that space than others, right? So even if it's not perfect, this information can help you better plan for it. Another baselining or retro commissioning step you can take is to check the placement, accuracy, and calibration of your sensors throughout the facility. Do your sensors give you an accurate representation of the measured metric they are capturing? Do your climate sensors match the temperature and humidity heat map you made before? Are they in the best location to capture the true conditions of your room? I've seen people panic in a dry room, for example, by just looking at their controls dashboard saying, oh my gosh, my dry room is at 99% relative humidity, when they actually go check the placement of that sensor and realize it's being smothered by freshly wet bud and it's not capturing the true conditions of the rooms. So it's a good step to do, get them calibrated. And that's another good point too, is having high quality handheld tools and sensors to help you verify system performance. It's extremely important. The data you collect is only good as the tool you are collecting it with. So look into getting some, like what they call NIST certified devices. Take care of your sensors, learn how to use them, and make sure they are regularly calibrated by professionals. The moral of this story really is to take the time to learn your space. It can be time consuming and tedious, but there is no other way to truly get to know your rooms and equipment without going in there and capturing data and baselining these systems. Okay, next slide. Programming, scheduling, and labeling. Another very important step for starting up a new cultivation facility. Programming ensures all equipment and systems, such as HVAC, lighting, and fertigation, are set up with the correct operational parameters, including automation schedules, sequences, and triggers. This ensures optimal performance at every phase of plant growth. And scheduling is a detailed plan of when each system operates, including environmental controls, fertigation and nutrient delivery, and light cycles, for example, making sure all of these align with the plant's growth stages. Efficient scheduling reduces energy use. It also minimizes downtime and maximizes output. Are you running all of your rooms lights on at the same time? Or are you having 50% of your lights on during the day and 50% of your rooms running at night to avoid peak hours for electrical use, just as an example? Early in the design phase of facility, I always challenge a lot of growers to create a detailed schedule, or you could call it a recipe, of exactly how they want to run their rooms prior to them being built, prior to engaging vendors. It's a great exercise to make sure you have the systems and programming in place to achieve that schedule or recipe. Get as nitty-gritty as possible, and then check with your equipment vendors to see if their systems can perform to those set points and the schedule or recipe you want to run. I've built day by day, hour by hour schedules for every minute of a flower cycle or veg cycle. These massive spreadsheets, prior to fully designing a facility, to make sure that our design can achieve our schedules. Try to make it as realistic as possible so that once you begin growing in your new facility, you aren't asking your equipment to do something it's not designed to do. And then labeling. Michael, I know you're a label kind of freak when it comes to your facilities.
Right.
What's
You're correct. Yeah.
you are, man.
Well, and I here's what I see in facilities. I see facilities that have no labeling. I see facilities that have minimal labeling, and I like to go a little bit overkill on labeling because it can be like a in-your-face living SOP. So when we talk about labeling, what are we talking about? So clear labeling of all equipment, piping, sensors, breakers, operational zones. They're essential for safety, maintenance, and troubleshooting. Proper labeling simplifies system management, helps the team quickly identify and resolve issues while maintaining a structured and organizational workflow. The way that I look at labeling is you don't have to be an expert in fertigation or HVAC or electricity or any of that stuff. But if you open a panel or you're looking at a skid, you should be able to understand that water flows in this way. It goes here. It goes this way. You should have turn this valve closed in an emergency. Never close this valve ever. All those things should be kind of right in your face, because if you have a system as complicated as the systems that cultivators are building, and you have one person like your facilities manager, and he's the only person that understands how all this stuff works, that person needs to be sick. That person needs to be on vacation. Things are going to arise, and you don't need to wait. So the more proactive you can be with labeling, the more proactive you can be with troubleshooting and providing solutions.
Yep.
I guess let's go on to the next slide with process flow, SOPs, and documentation. I stress this to operators that I'm working with before they're operational, and they're always like, oh boy, the licensing process and the design process and all this equipment selection, it's so much work. Wow, we've been doing so much work. And I don't want to discredit that in any way. But the reality is when you commission your facility and you bring plants in for the first time, that is when there's no turning back. The work now it's a living, breathing entity. It doesn't care if it's your birthday or your anniversary or Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever it may be. They're needy. And so you only get this very magical time to plan for the win right before you go live. And so people are like, well, I'm going to make all my process flow and SOPs and all my documentations and my templates like once we're operating. Once you're operating, you're going to be running around like a wild child. Real quick, we got poll number 2 up. If you like what you're hearing today from Anders and myself, we do offer all of our listeners a complimentary design review or just a general 30-minute free consultation where we want to see people be successful. If we can contribute to your success, whether it's in a minor way or a major way, we are empowered over at Pipp to do so. And so if you're interested in a complimentary design review or just a quick chat with Anders and I, even if it's just to say what's up, feel free to hit yes here, and we'll reach out to you after the webinar later this week, and we'll set up some calls. All right, let me get that poll out of my face. So when we talk about testing workflow and optimization during the commissioning process, we're ensuring that all system processes and operations are performing efficiently and effectively as possible. This is before live plants are introduced again. But here's how you can approach testing workflow optimization during the CX process. First and foremost, before testing, we clearly define the critical workflows within the facility. These workflows might include propagation to flower, how plants move and how people move from propagation, mother propagation, tissue culture, whatever it might be, through veg, through flower, harvest and drying. How does irrigation and nutrients move through the facility? What is the interaction between the HVAC, the lighting, and the humidity control components? How does cleaning work? So what I like to do is I like to take my architectural design, and then I get usually a green marker for plants. I get a red marker for waste, and I get a blue marker for people. And I basically will trace, how do the plants move through the facility? How do the people move through the facility? How does the waste move through the facility? As some of you may be aware, I'm a Floridian and we deal with hurricanes a lot. And in hurricanes, you always hear this reference of a spaghetti diagram. And that's where they attempt to predict where the hurricane's going to go. A little accountability on these predictions, but they try. But that being said, you can implement these spaghetti diagrams based on how things flow through your system. And what you'll find here is you might find areas where you're going back and forth. Maybe you're cross-contaminating. Maybe there's a bottleneck. And you can do all this before your systems ever go live. And if you want to take it to the next level, you can do mock run-throughs and simulations. You can conduct mock run-throughs to the facility to simulate actual workflows. You can use test crops in some cases. I'm supporting a grower in Greece who's currently growing tomatoes in his greenhouse while he's waiting for approval from the country of Greece to grow cannabis. So meanwhile, yeah, he's growing tomatoes, but he's using his substrate sensors. He's using his environmental controls. He's starting to dial in that interface and getting just comfortable with this new project. You can even use non-living materials like clone trays, containers, pots, stone wool blocks, and slabs, and simulate that movement through the facility. How many blocks or pots or bags or containers, whatever you're using for your substrate, how many of them fit on a cart that you might be moving from veg to flower? You can figure these things out now. So yeah, so it's a simple, what I'm suggesting here, it doesn't cost any real money either. This is all like pen and paper kind of stuff and just putting a little bit of energy. But I promise you that if you take the time to do this, it'll pay off. Another thing that I like to do is, you got something, Anders?
No, sorry, keep going.
Another thing I like to do is I like to collaborate with people that I respect in the field. A lot of growers sometimes, they feel this pressure, like I'm the quote unquote master grower and everyone's depending on me. Well, there's an incredible community out here, and I've only been able to achieve what I've been able to achieve in my career because I have surrounded myself with some of the best players. And what you'll find is these players, they're willing to share. If the mutual respect is there, if to say, come on into my facility, come take a look, come pressure test this. Hey, take a look at this design. Try and break this. Anders and I do this all the time with each other. I'm like, break my assumption here, break this design. Tell me where it's going to make a mistake. Tell me where it's flawed. So, taking that holistic approach with the community that you have, and this could be consultants, other cultivators, HVAC technicians, engineers, subject matter experts like Anders and myself, as an example. The other thing I like to look at is like timing. This is another thing that doesn't cost much money. Get yourself the cheapest little stopwatch and start timing things. Start timing your workflows. How many steps does it take? I remember when I was working out in California, we had 5 1-acre greenhouses in the Salinas Valley, which everybody kind of had 5 1-acre greenhouses. But I learned really quickly on a 1-acre plot, if I could reduce any task by 10 seconds, it had significant financial benefits from a reduction in labor. So in cannabis, not only do minutes matter, seconds matter when it comes to labor. How far does your labor have to go to grab something? Start to really just kind of work through all these things. And you can do this before you go live. So, forms and templates are another one. There's so many, you have to decide, how are we going to capture data? Who's going to collect this data? Who's going to analyze this data? The cannabis industry collects a tremendous amount of data, and I find that half the time it's just kind of there and nobody's aggregating it, and no one's like helping cultivators make data-driven decisions with real data. And so, come up with like, all right, which part of this data is going to be digital? Are we going to be collecting any of this by paper? Oh, it's going to be on a form. What's that form look like? You can do all this stuff before you go live. Don't wait till you go live to go, boy, it'd be really nice to have a form here. Oh, let me, go away from something critical so I can create this form. Setting yourself up for success is hopefully the messaging that you're hearing today.
Yeah, and I mean, implementing a data tracking analytics process is more common today than maybe it used to be, but data is king in a commercial cultivation facility today. And like you said, having a plan for how you're going to capture it, who's going to collect it, who's entering it, who's analyzing it, scheduling time in your employee's day to actually enter it and collect that data is really important. A few other things real quick before we move on. We're about to wrap up here soon, but gather feedback. If you're a manager running one of these facilities, you have a plan in your mind, please listen to your team doing day-to-day tasks. They often have some of the best ideas and input for how to optimize a task and make it go faster than you would ever think of if you're not doing it right there next to them every single day. And then once all this feedback is gathered and you have these plans in place, adjust your SOPs and retest them. I can't tell you how many times we see facilities put an SOP stack together at the creation of a facility and then leave it on a shelf and never update them. That's not the intention for an SOP. Okay,
We're gonna
so
end our time a little bit so we can answer some of your questions, but I'm gonna
Okay.
push ahead a little bit, Anders. The last thing we want to talk to you about today is commissioning plants. Now I'll first talk domestically and then I'll talk internationally, but for cultivation operations in the United States, it's crucial to comply with state and local regulations regarding how plants enter into the cultivation facilities. Each state or local jurisdiction may have different protocols that must be followed. Some of the states enforce strict regulations, including thorough inspections, screening, detailed documentations. They want to know what's coming in, when it's coming in, that kind of stuff. Now, in contrast, other states have more lenient regulations. They allow genetics to kind of move in and out with minimal documentation. And additionally, certain states implement a one-time immaculate conception period and adopt a don't ask, don't tell approach. So first and foremost, you need to understand all these regulations and make sure that you abide by them to avoid legal issues and ensure that successful operations for the facility. Now, if I pivot to international cultivation, it's a whole other animal. Plants and plant material imported often must be accompanied by a phytosanitary certificate issued by exporting countries. This ensures the plants are free of pests and disease and other biosecurity risks. Many countries require import permits for cannabis plants, and the importation must comply with international treaties, such as the Single Conventions on Narcotic Drugs Treaty. Export and import licenses for controlled substances may also be required. This is what's made on the international side. Tissue culture is probably one of the #1 considered best practices for moving cannabis facilities, plants across borders. It minimizes the risk of transmitting pests and disease, and it's easier to store and ship, and it takes up less space. Plants often need to be quarantined upon arrival and inspected by government bodies to ensure that they meet all import health standards. Now, regardless if you're doing this domestically in the US or somewhere internationally, you always want to have a quarantine protocol. You want to be screening for pests and pathogens, viroids, viruses. This is a vital step before introducing plants into your facility to ensure they've been thoroughly screened for pests and pathogens. Also, it's important to know if there was any IPM practices, so any type of foliar sprays or drenches that occurred prior to plants being on site. You want to make sure that any of those IPM practices are aligned with your local state or country regulations. Though it'd be terrible for you to finally get in your facility and then find out that you tested and failed a pesticide that you never applied in the first place. One of the biggest challenges is, where do these plants come from? This is where the gray area comes in, off-site staging. And usually the timeline on when plants come in is not always clear. So you have to play this game of, okay, I'm growing bigger moms. Am I going to bring in moms? Am I bringing in cuttings? In certain states or countries, you might be able to work with a local nursery. I always encourage, if you're buying from a local nursery, don't just purchase enough clones to create mothers. Purchase enough clones to create mothers plus at least 1 or 2 flowering rooms right away, so you can just get into revenue faster while you're taking the time to veg up those moms so that you can take cuttings off of them. The only downside that I see to working with a local nursery is there's a good potential that your competitors are growing the same thing that you are, and you might not have a differentiator right out the gate. So in short, tissue culture internationally, best for genetic uniformity, sterileness, long-term transport. However, it requires a lab facility to propagate, and you probably need a strategic acclimation plan for your growers. Seeds are another option. They're easier to transport and handle, but may lead to genetic variability and have longer lead times for maturity. And you might have more inconsistency. Clones maintain genetic consistency, but they're more vulnerable to environmental stress and contamination during transport. So there's so much more that we could talk about, but we're getting tight on time. I would just want to say thank you so much. For those of you who can stick around, Anders and I are going to do Q&A. For any questions that we cannot answer today, we always write a blog within a week or so, and we put it on our website, and we can email it out to you. So feel free to come with the questions. And Anders, you want to start cherry picking some questions over there that you like?
Yeah, jumping right into it. Fred had a good question. How often do you take advantage of electric and gas utility efficiency, financial incentives for high energy efficient equipment, and precision controls for your projects? If so, have you had success in securing the incentives? What have the barriers been for you? Yes, I would say nowadays these incentive programs are becoming more and more common, especially with the work of groups like Resource Innovation Institute, RII. They have been integral in helping promulgate these programs throughout the country to various utilities, local utilities, in all the different legal markets. At first, these incentives are primarily just for lighting because, frankly, the math was easy. It was easy to calculate the efficiency of an LED light over HPS lights. But now they're becoming more advanced. They are including incentives for high-performing HVAC systems and dehumidification systems, equipment with EC motors in it, like fan motors or irrigation pumps. So, whenever possible, these projects are going after incentives and rebates, and it can sometimes hugely offset your CapEx to be able to afford more efficient technologies.
You
But
can lean
it's
on your vendors for this too. Like your lighting vendors can help you typically, your HVAC vendors can help you. But when you're doing site selection, it's really important to look at what utilities are existing. I'm always looking for natural gas. The property has big natural gas and big power, you're kind of off to the races.
Mhm.
Yeah, leverage your vendors in this case. Anything that has energy, even at Pipp, there's rebates on our fans.
EC motors. Yeah, not all utilities will honor that, but some will. And so that's kind of the nuance of it is, and there are third-party energy efficiency engineers that can do this process for you. They typically get paid once they get the rebate for you. So it's a really useful process to go through, but start the process early. It's easier to do until don't do it the last minute. Okay, let's see. There's a couple other here. Does Pipp provide retro commissioning services? No, unfortunately, we don't. Pipp does not do commissioning and startup other than we install our own systems, but we don't, as a company, provide formal startup and commissioning services. Really, we're doing this talk as a way to kind of bring awareness to it. But to one of the other questions, Michael and I can help put together kind of a list of some reputable third-party commissioning agents and people we know in the industry. And maybe we can put that on the blog with the rest of the Q&A answers. So you have some resources to look at. There's a lot of good ones out there. Let's see here. What other good ones there, Michael? Oh, Marco has a question. Speaking in terms of size, what would be the minimum space, in your opinion, to be able to start testing the operation of a production facility? I would say any size. To give you some scale, almost everything we talked about today, for example, I did on a research chamber with one 4x8 tray in it. And all of this can also then be scaled up to hundreds of thousands of square feet. So really, regardless of scale, these lessons are important for anyone going down the path of building a cultivation facility. Let's see here. What other questions do we have? That might cover most of them. There's a few others that we're happy to address in our
Again,
blog.
you can see our email addresses here. Sometimes those questions come to me the next morning or when I'm laying in bed thinking about the day. So if you can't tell, Anders and I try and be as visible and available. Again, our goal is to see you be successful. We want to see you have that phase 2. We want to get that email from you that you just won a cannabis cup or that your brand was recognized for this, that, or the other. That's our goal. We're trying to help grow the industry, and we're doing it with the resources that we have and the microphone and the voice that we have. So a big thanks again to Pipp and Cannabis Business Times, and thank you all for being with us today. We look forward to talking to you on the next one.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Really appreciate you sharing all this information, and your goal of educating people, really resonates. I saw a message in the chat about a project they called the Cautionary Tale that where millions of dollars were lost. And that's exactly the type of thing that we at Cannabis Business Times, and I know you two and everyone at Pipp is hoping to help people avoid that type of situation. That's just absolutely devastating and can be avoided, you know, with taking some of these steps that you're talking about. So appreciate you, appreciate Pipp for making this possible to get this out to our audience. And thanks to everyone for joining us. And again, we'll be sending out the archived webinar when it's available, as well as a link to the blog post from Anders and Michael. And you should be receiving that within the next few days. And again, we can follow up with the blog post if it's not ready yet. Thank you again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.